welcome to Jillian. It's over to you, Jillian.
Thank you very much for inviting me and for having this chance to share with you all. Now, I did forget that there is going to be translation going on. So I'll try and keep my pace good, because basically what I would like to do for the first hour is really kind of a little bit swamp you with this much content, but I'll try and do it in a clear, logical way, because I really appreciated, Madhvi, your interaction just before the introductions, because and that people are honest that it's not always easy. Sometimes life does throw us a curveball, and it does not feel like friendship. It feels like a test, and it often feels that we're failing those tests, and that continues for your whole spiritual journey. That is why it is a journey. So telling people that be patient, it takes time, and be patient with yourself. Life can be challenging enough without beating ourselves up for not being perfect. I started my spiritual journey with the Brahma Kumaris. I was 17 at the time, and it was in New Zealand. And I really thought I would be enlightened within a few years. And, here I still am on the journey. So really what I'd like to share is some things that have really helped me, particularly with my relationship with life, because that's the thing that throws these curveballs at us. And so, it's not just about learning to meditate or connect with yourself or kind of go beyond, but it's about how you see life, how you interact with it, because that's kind of where the rubber hits the road. So I won't make this first now 50 minutes very interactive. I'll just kind of go through the content. And if you have any questions, make a note, or if you have any comments, we can definitely get onto that later. But I'm gonna put my screen on. Okay, so how to make friends with life. And I thought this was a great picture to start with, because in a way, this is the essence of it: dancing in the rain with a big smile on your face. Because life sometimes brings you, sunshine, sometimes clouds, sometimes rain, sometimes big thunderstorms. The monsoon has just started here in Mount Abu. And so we learned to smile with the baking heat, and now we learn to smile with the constant dampness, so life is always changing. Now, let's look at how to define what is life, actually, because in the spiritual path, none of these words or concepts should be taken with assumptions that we know what they mean. We want to break it down and see what is life, what is me, what is my relationship with life. So just in a simple way, I think most of us could think about life. First aspect is what is happening around me, kind of where I exist in the time-space reality, and this is where the interaction between me and life kind of takes place. Now, in the spiritual path, we talk a lot about what is life, because spiritual journey is not just understanding who I am or who is God. It's about what is life and how to interact with that, how to have a philosophy of life that enables us to be in that joyful, cheerful state that we really want to be in. And so one of the analogies is that life is a drama, a serial that goes on and on and on, like the days of our lives, with us as the main character interacting with other characters. But we can also see life as a school. That's something that helps us to see things that happen as lessons. And really, a lot of those lessons, this is, I thought, a good quote, that life is the school and love is the lesson. And all these relationships are assignments designed to take us further into that state of love. Even if we held on to one of these analogies and kind of really milked it, it gives us a lot of clarity. Sometimes we think we need to be more willpowered or more powerful, but often it's really clarity that we're lacking. we get confused about what's going on. I think a lot of us also love this analogy of life as a kind of a matrix that responds to our consciousness, and we're trying to sort of crack the code and come out of it to the state of freedom. A lot of scientists are saying that life is actually what we call life. The things that we see and are interacting with are a kind of a hologram that we're all sort of mutually projecting. And therefore we see it as reality, but they're questioning how this actually works. And I think a lot of us love to explore, you know, these sort of concepts because it loosens, or it creates a little bit of detachment between I and the thing that I'm experiencing. And in that space of detachment, I come closer to me, or you know, where the wisdom is, and a little bit more detached from where this actions are taking place, this sort of constant change of scenery in the hologram. Another analogy which I personally love, and I will go into it today, is that we're playing a game with multiple levels. And when you up a level, then you can tell you've upped a level because now things that used to bother you no longer bother you. And I think that's a kind of a source of comfort for when we kind of feel like, why am I not enlightened yet? You know, why am I still bothered by these different things that happen? Yes, but are you still bothered by the same things that used to bother you, or have you moved beyond those? And so kind of appreciating that, no, you're not on the same level, and you don't generally go from level 1 to enlightenment overnight, despite your optimism when you first kind of start on the spiritual journey. If you're into the video game analogy, you could also see it as a multiplayer game. You know, you're not just playing on your own little screen, but actually there's an interaction between the players going on, which makes it a much more complex, interesting game. Now, some people see life as a battlefield, and this might not be the sweetest analogy. And in a sense, on the spiritual journey, we say if you're really enlightened, you won't battle. But actually, this is an analogy that we also find in the Gita, that Krishna was Arjuna, the head of the Pandava army who are fighting the sort of bad guys. He had Krishna as a source of wisdom with him as he mastered, and here you can see the horses as the senses. And so, you know, every analogy does help us to see things from a different perspective. And this is, I think, part of the spiritual journey is developing that flexibility to see things from different concepts. And when a concept becomes a deeper sense of truth, you know it because you feel the freedom coming from that. You know, they say the truth always sets you free. So a concept in itself is only a starting point. But when you yourself go deep into it and then apply it to your situation and then see how it affects your feelings, your emotions, your actions, then you can say it's become a truth. So any of these analogies can actually be useful. In India or within Buddhism, there's this idea of samsara, that life is just constant suffering and birth and rebirth. And that if you kind of see the light, you can escape from that. But is it escape from life itself that we're really looking for, or an escape from suffering? For me, it's more an escape from illusion of that makes us suffer in this thing called life. Another word that I love is life is a co-creation, that ultimately we're creators and we're creating what we call life, but we're not doing it on our own. We're doing it together with others. Now, we've talked about life as kind of what's happening around us, but actually really it's the life of the mind and how we are perceiving what's happening around us, what's happening within us. and in other words, my personal reality. And when my personal reality, the way I see life, isn't matching truth, we get distress signals. That's all that suffering is. That's all that, you know, when you feel like I failed, I hurt myself and it bothered me too much. It's just a signal that you're perceiving from a limited reality, and you need to widen your perspective. And you'll constantly widen it. And as you do, you'll feel more and more free and more yourself. Now, why the analogy of friendship? There's this beautiful quote you can see here from Khalil Gibran, the Lebanese writer, philosopher. He said, "Let there be no purpose in friendship, save the deepening of the spirit." And that's why, you know, friendship is often seen as one of the holiest, most beautiful relationships you can have. You know, whether it's within partners, within children and parents, on any relationship level, if we say that my mum has become my good friend, there's a real sweetness about that. You know, it's like, it's the role which is the freest from roles without expectation. Yes, Madhvi.
Yeah, sorry. I think you need to watch your speed because translators are struggling a bit.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
By the way, I'm not reading the chat bar because it will distract me. So
it's good. You shouldn't. I will let you know. Okay, that's perfect what you're doing. Thank you.
I shall try and slow down. Okay, so yes, friendship, dost, you know, it's the most in a sense spiritual relationship. And so it's if you had a relationship with life as being friends with life, you can see that it would be a relationship of trust, of intimacy, of enjoyment. You know, it's perhaps the sweetest of all the analogies. Now, Eckhart Tolle, his quote was that our inner purpose is to awaken. It's as simple as that. And we share this purpose with every other person on the planet. It's the purpose of humanity. And so friendship, the purpose of friendship is the deepening of spirit, and the purpose of life is to awaken. And so friendship and life and inner purpose are one and the same. It's to realize who we are. Now, there's, I think, three, and maybe more, but let's look at three kind of stages that we can relate to with life. Now, it's not that we're go from one and then ultimately to the next and the next. We actually kind of go up and down all the time with them. Like during the day, you may go through all of them in the space of 5 minutes. You know, you might, Madhvi, you mentioned that something happened to you and you said I think you hurt yourself. And you said within 5 minutes, you pulled yourself out of that, whatever the suffering of the mind was. And often the first thought when something happens is, why? Why me? Why is this happening? You know, that feeling that you're a victim and it's not fair and you're suffering and frustrated. And really the key, if you're going to measure spiritual progress, is kind of how quickly you can pull yourself into the next stage. And it can happen really quick. You might jump from, oh, what the hell, to all is well in a short time. But the next stage is life is happening for me. And so now you've moved from a frustrated victim to an awareness that actually this is a perfectly designed lesson for me. Some people, you could say it's karma, but what is karma? You know, that I put things and they come back. It's the same. It's the teacher saying, okay, this is the lesson based on what you did, you know, and it's all for our benefit. So even this stage is not the highest stage, but it will take us out of that frustration and blame into curiosity and questioning. So now we're no longer reacting, but we're trying to kind of understand, why is this happening? What do I need to learn from it? How can I rise above it or go through it, etc. Now, the next level is that life is not even happening to you or for you, but it's happening through you. And this is where you're in the creator stage. You now, even in that moment, you no longer need to learn something. You're simply expressing who you genuinely are as a spirit. Now, I'm sure that most of you will be familiar with this Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. It's, I think, very relevant to this discussion. Now, you have the lower basic physical level of needs, and as you move up, the sort of aim of this triangle is to get to self-actualization, knowing who you are and fulfilling your potential. Now, when we're in the lower levels, our attitude to life as this kind of victim is that we need life to change. We're waiting for something to change so that now I feel relief from the suffering. But of course, because we haven't actually learned anything, that relief is just temporary until the next thing comes along. And that's where we're not friends with life, but life is like a roller coaster, which makes us feel a bit sick. Now, kind of moving up to that student phase, I'm looking more at, whatever happens, I need to learn something from life. And this student phase will continue until the end, I would think. And it can have many subtle nuances, and it can be a very intimate relationship with life. That's why, for me, I love these analogies of holograms and matrices, because it often feels like life is this thing that really responds like instantly to my thoughts and is constantly giving me signals and hints and lessons. At any moment, I'm awake to it, and it's kind of exciting and fun. I remember a few years ago, I was in my native home country, New Zealand, and I was staying in a beautiful like community, like off-grid type of place. And I was just kind of volunteering, as a kind of, instead of paying to stay there, I was just helping with the garden. But I was kind of overdoing it. I was wanting the garden to be perfect and working way more hours than anybody expected of me. But I was putting that on myself. And then often you feel, I can feel resentful as if somebody's making me do it. But it's just my own, sanskars, my own habits. And then I stood on a piece of wood, and a nail went into my foot. And luckily it pierced the shoe, and it didn't hurt too much, but it pierced my foot exactly where you see Jesus Christ's foot being penetrated. And to me, it was the universe going, oh, okay, there's a martyr, you're being a martyr. And that's the kind of interaction I mean, that life can be constantly giving you metaphors and symbols and signals about where you're going. I had a conversation a few days ago with David, who works in the art department here, because he spent a lot of time kind of as a hermit in very remote Australia. And he was saying he was getting to the point where if he ate one more mouthful than his body needed, he would feel like a prick. Or if he cleared too much foliage away from the path that he followed, he would get the same little kind of pricking feeling. So even our body is part of life, and it's also trying to communicate. So this student life can be very rich, but ultimately, we're getting towards what we call the creation stage. And you don't always see this included in the model, where you actually go beyond what we call those hierarchy of needs, and you deeply feel that you actually need nothing, that you are everything that you need. And then from that space, you're creating. So everything is a creation, your vibration, your words, your service, whatever it is. And this kind of moving from beyond the limited needs into the self, this is something that happens actually very naturally. They've done studies of people. This was actually from a film called The Shift. Dr. Wayne Dyer, some of you will be familiar with him. But what was the shift that he's talking about? It literally is the shift from being stuck on the lower egoic limited needs and transcending them. And so that looks like, when you're young, you know, chasing wealth, adventure, pleasure, and moving into spirituality. And it was slightly different flavor for men and for women. I wish seriously wish I had another hour. I'll move on for the sake of getting where we need to go. Now, this is a little bit of a map of when we talk about I, the self. We could mean different things, but this is a little map. So in the center, you can see your absolute self, your spiritual essence, your light, psyche, many words for that. And what we're all looking for really in while we're still in these bodies is to express that soul as purely as we can through the roles that we play. You know, yes, they're just roles, but actually, aren't we here to play the best role that we can? So we want to really have true self-expression. And what stands in the way of it, one of the biggest topics of spiritual development, is understanding the ego. And we'll look into that. There's another layer there, which is how other people see us, which is often, again, an extension of our ego. So recently, I read this quote from Carl Jung, and I very much related to it, that the spiritual journey is not a career, and it's not one long success story. It is a series of small humiliations of the false self that become more and more profound. In a way, the feeling of humiliation is, again, probably coming from the ego. But often when we kind of see how the ego makes us play our roles in such a absurd way, that we have to kind of either laugh at ourselves or be embarrassed. So ultimately, I think we want to move to laughing at those games of the small self. So what is the ego? Now, I'm going to share some content that Mike George shared with me and others many years ago. And it really helped me immensely. I often share it with others. I will try and go through it succinctly, because there's a lot of depth to it. Now, the definition that he shared of ego was that it's simply an attachment to a false belief or image of myself. And then I added, deriving your sense of self from what you're not. I know that, you know, psychiatrists, psychologists everybody has a different definition, but for now, let's use this definition. Now, I love this analogy of a castle, because those false belief and images are multifold. And we've been building them from the time that we're old enough to get language, maybe before. But at least we can conceptualize, you're a pretty girl, you come from a good family, you're a clever boy, and on and on and on. And so that castle builds up in our consciousness and has many, many layers to it. And then we get attached to those beliefs. Now, I want to play a short video. I've kind of tried to edit it down to make it shorter than it was. I haven't actually tested the video sound. If it doesn't work, I'll just move on and tell you to look it up. But I think it's extremely useful for us, whether you've been on the spiritual path for a long time or you're new to it. It's a beautiful definition of ego. So here.
Ego, which is a kind of phantom self that you carry around, that you mistake for who you actually are. It consists of identifications with possessions, identification with your own body, including, of course, the color of your skin. It's part of your own body. Identification with things that you can do, abilities, things you know. Now, what does it mean, identification with? It means you derive your sense of self from something that is not you. So let's say it's my car. And it could start for a little child who gets a toy car. And so the child is given a toy car, and that's the beginning of the ego, is the feeling of the child, this is mine. So there's a certain identification with the toy, a self-identification. So it enhances, because it only works if another child does not have that toy, then it really works. This is my car. So it enhances a certain sense of identity. And identity is something that humans desperately seek after meeting the needs of food and shelter. One could almost say the next thing after that is the psychological need in human beings for a sense of identity. And the first thing that humans do, and you cannot, there's no preventing this, they seek an identity by identifying with this, that, or the other. Later, the adult may have a car and derives part of their sense of identity from having this car, but it only works because it's compared. The ego is comparative, the image in your mind of who you are. Ultimately, it seeks some kind of superiority. It compares itself to others in one way or another. It seeks some kind of superiority over others. It's an unconscious process. There's always an unease behind it, because the ego is never feels really at ease or fulfilled. There's always an underlying sense of lack, of insufficiency, of not enough. I am not enough. Because ultimately, it's only a mental image that you mistake for who you are. It's often associated with a narrative in your mind that tells you about my life. You call it my life. Me and my life. This is me. This is my life. People have a relationship with themselves. Isn't that strange? They have a relationship with them. So this is why you have to, I hate myself. I love myself. In both cases, it's better to love yourself than to hate yourself. But in both cases, there's a duality, there's a split that has happened. There's you, and there's the self that you either hate or love. So the question is, if there is the self that you either hate or love, who are you? Who is the one that hates or loves that self? What is going on here? One of the main teachings of the Buddha is to recognize the unreality of the self, that it is a mental construct that you mistake for who you are. So ultimately, the ego, then the essence of ego, you could say, is complete identification with thoughts. So, and the recurring thoughts in your mind that tell you who you are, that's the ego. So waking up means to suddenly recognize that the thoughts that go through your head continuously, but also the emotions that reflect those thoughts, are not who you are. Underneath it all, there's this vast realm of conscious presence. There's a presence there, without which you wouldn't be able to perceive anything. You wouldn't be able to think anything. And what's left when you're not thinking about your history, your personal history, or the future? You're just becoming aware of this moment, yourself, this moment. But what is that self? It's no longer the historical self. You can't say very much about it. There is an underlying sense of presence, of alive, conscious presence. It's still, it's alive. The awakening can begin with realizing that you are not the thoughts that go through your mind. That's the beginning. Now, what has arisen at that moment? Awareness. Suddenly, you realize that there is a dimension of consciousness in you that's not thinking, but just conscious. And that is your essence identity. To be rooted in that, it's ultimately very simple. I don't know why they don't teach that at school. I mean, the most important life lesson is the transcendent dimension of life, of who you are. To find all the ancient teachings using different terms and different words, they all point to this possibility of realizing the transcendent dimension of who you are.
Yes, the transcendent
Ego.
dimension of who we are. So he mentioned that the ego likes to identify with this, that, or the other. It's constant. The ego is constantly trying to feed and build up that castle in every moment, every interaction that happens. It does it with external things in our life. I won't go into them. We don't have another hour for this page only. But for instance, we can, on the spiritual path, you can also get very attached to your role in service or your level of spirituality. You may compare yourself and go, well, I didn't react like they did. I'm definitely at a higher level. There's many traps. As you go into the spiritual path, often you just replace one set of egos with another. So a lot of external aspects, and for each one there will be a different priority of those. We also get our ego based on internal factors. So my point of view is the right way of seeing it. My beliefs are clear. My knowledge is the deepest. We may get attached to our story and like to talk about what we did. We use the word I and my and me a lot. That indicates that we're referencing kind of our story a lot. Getting stuck in I am depressed, using those kind of phrases, we're identifying with temporary emotions and building an identity, or in fact, with identity politics, people like to introduce themselves with a bunch of labels. And this, of course, creates division when we compare our labels to other people. Now, because it's such a kind of deep spiritual drive in all of us to wake up to who am I, when we identify with all of these things, that we're not, this ultimately creates a sense of insecurity. And so come back to that analogy of the castle that we're all trying to make as big as possible so that we feel as secure as possible. But what's always there to threaten that castle is life. There you are, you've succeeded in building your castle up in whatever way you think is going to make you feel good about yourself. And here come the tides of life threatening it. Now, what happens is that feeling of insecurity that is very deeply in all of our unconscious. It's just a mechanism that happens as long as we're based on our ego self, which I think most of us are probably 99% of the time. We have our awakened moments, but a lot of the time we don't realize that we're in our castle, and that ego is like a little soldier constantly monitoring to make sure that the ego is safe, looking to build it up and looking to protect what you have. And that then comes out in our behavior. So if we're exhibiting any of these behaviors, it's showing that we're unhappy with life. We're trying to control the circumstances in order to feel friendship. So I put at the end of this list, fear is not a relationship of friendship, and nor is fighting with life. Now, let's just look at the first one of these behaviors, arguing. And arguing is often happens when our ego identifies with our idea. And this could be in any context. We've all done it. You're presenting what you think is a very clear, truthful, obvious fact of life, and now someone's contradicting you. And now you feel that little bit of irritation. Maybe you're like interrupting them to get your point across again. And you no longer feel relaxed. You're in that feeling of conflict. But what happens with the ego is that your ego, when you're fighting for your ego, it feels like you're fighting for your life, because you can't tell the difference. The mind doesn't know the difference. It just perceives danger. And when the mind perceives a danger, it starts eliciting adrenaline, cortisol, all these hormones which get you ready to fight or fly away or freeze at the danger. And once those kind of emotions kick in, then our ego is really like fighting for our life. And it's not logical. It's just an idea. But as soon as we identify with the idea, it's not just an idea. It's my idea. And that's exactly one example of how that feeling of fear brings those strong illogical behaviors. You know, when we calm down and kind of detach, we can see it's just an idea. And yet we get trapped again and again, blaming, gossiping, lying, protecting our image in front of others. So all of these words, there's probably hundreds more behaviors that are evidence that the ego has hijacked our consciousness and it's trying to protect itself or trying to feed off the drama of life. Now, just to show you a couple of practical examples, you know, that behavior of blaming others. You know, I'm innocent. It was your fault that we didn't finish the project or things went wrong. So we can detect, if we look, we can begin to detect, instead of kind of blaming ourselves for blaming, we get curious. Okay, I'm acting in one of these ways. Don't judge it, observe it. This means that I'm coming from a space of fear. And so in this case, people are going to question my competence as the team leader. And so what am I protecting? My professional ego, my professional reputation. Another example, if we're very honest, when we gossip about others, this is the ego trying to feed off others. You know, we wouldn't do that. We're a level above. So the example here is, I heard he cheated on her with her best friend. You know, why would someone talk about that? It's because maybe they doubt their own marriage, their own wife role, and they're attached to being seen as a perfect wife. Now, and this is what I suggest that we do when you find yourself acting like this, be curious. Try and work out, what's the game that my ego is playing on me now? Now, ultimately, it would be good to be able to detect that the ego is taken over our consciousness before we gossip, blame, and argue and get annoyed with people, to do it on a more subtle internal level. And how we can do that is by monitoring, how am I feeling? You know, this is part of what we call self-awareness. You know, when I first started meditating, I was just trying to be a point of light all the time. And then later on, you realize there's so many ways we can approach our spiritual journey. But more and more, I'm just looking like, how do I feel? And this is where it can be extremely valuable. And again, I thank Mike George for this, because I haven't heard it from anyone else. And yet it's so clear. Excuse me. Because of time constraints, I won't ask you, but I'll go straight into the content. The difference between emotions and feelings. So we can see the word itself, emotion. There's a movement of energy going on. And so this was his definition, that emotion is the disturbance of the energy of my consciousness. So imagine when you're calm, if we could measure it, it would be like a lake. But now I've got an earthquake. This is a seismograph measuring an earthquake. And all day long, we have these little mini earthquakes. You know, some big storms, some little minor ripples. But what's causing those ripples is when the thing that we're attached to, that our ego is latched onto as part of us, when that object, and it could be just a thought object, it could be a person, it could be a thing, it could be an event, a circumstance, many faceted thing here. But when any one of those things is threatened or damaged, so it doesn't even need to be damaged, it could just be a disapproving look from someone that triggers a deep feeling that I am not enough. Now, let's look at some examples of emotion, because emotion doesn't feel good. We'll look at what is feeling in a moment, but emotion doesn't feel good. So when you're keeping an eye on how you feel, if you feel that disturbance in your consciousness, it means your ego is affecting you. It's very kind of simple and useful to remember. So anger, if we go back to the analogy of the castle, anger is essentially get the F away from my castle. You know, I feel threatened by your actions, by your words, by your look. Envy, oh, I want her castle. Sadness, oh, I used to have a great castle. Talking a lot about your past successes and your heyday. Excitement, I'm getting some new bricks for my castle. I was giving this session to a group of friends here in Mount Abu. And the next, I was explaining this, a feeling of excitement that you're getting some bricks. And the next day I noticed that I had suddenly 5 new followers on YouTube, and I felt, oh, excitement. And then I was kind of teasing myself that, oh, you got some new bricks, eh? How exciting for you. And kind of laughing at how my ego still plays those little tricks. Overwhelmed, that feeling like I need to hold my castle together at all times and present myself as perfect. Insulted, how dare they criticize my castle? That feeling of competitiveness, that we need to, there's only a limited amount of bricks and we have to fight others to get them. Insecurity, you know, my castle's not good enough and everyone knows it. And revenge, you know, how dare they reject my castle? I'm going to make them regret it. And you see this with when women is rejected, they say, no, hell has no fury like a woman scorned or rejected. So that anger turns into, I'm going to show them. So these are all emotions, and emotions are addictive because they all have a chemical component. So just like if you drink 6 cups of coffee every morning, you're going to be wired up. When we're very emotional, which means when ego is really controlling our consciousness, there's a lot of not just upheaval in the mind, but in the body as well. And we actually start to crave that familiar sensation of feeling jealous or feeling stressed or leaving things to the last minute and then getting excited about the panic of rushing. Now, sorry, one second. So yes, we can unconsciously create a situation in order to get that hit of emotional cocktail that we're kind of used to. And this is why people often get from one bad situation into a next, because that kind of feels natural to the soul to be kind of peaceless all the time. Now, if you come back to the idea that it's not that life is happening to me or even for me, but actually through me as a creator. So this is when I'm tapping into my soul and my source of love. And then I'm in the mode of abundant thinking. I'm focused on serving. I don't need anything. I'm simply available to be used as an instrument. So I'm at that kind of beyond the peak. And the opposite of that is that life is happening to me and I'm looking at all the problems, I'm fighting, I'm full of fear, the ego is in control. I'm very competitive and focused on lack. Now, for the sake of time, I won't actually play this, but I will recommend that if you want to understand that, no, I will play it. I will play it. And Madhvi, I'm going to ask for 10 minutes extra. Can we make
Sure.
the
Yes,
okay?
absolutely fine, Jillian. Just go ahead.
Okay.
So then, when we live in 2 states of mind and body, living in survival is living in our animal state. When we live in survival, we live in stress. And we live in stress, there's contraction that takes place in the body. And because we're using a lot of the body's resources, we experience what's called catabolism or tissue breakdown. When the body's in that state, there's dis-ease or imbalance. There's degeneration that takes place in the body. The emotions of fear, anger, sadness are the primary emotions of survival. The self comes first. When you're living in that state, all of your attention is on your environment, all of your attention is on your body, all of your attention is on time. There's always energy lost in the system. We're living in emergency mode. We're narrow focused or object focused. We experience separation. We're determining reality with our senses. In other words, if we can't see it, if we can't smell it, if we can't taste it, if we can't hear it, we can't feel it, it doesn't exist. We're living by cause and effect. We're waiting for our environment to change to give us the relief from the discomfort that we're feeling inside of us. In survival and in stress, we don't see many possibilities because it's not a time to create. The brain and heart function in a very incoherent state. And in survival, we are craving the known because the unknown is just too much of a scary place. Now, when we begin to create the creative state, we could call that the divine aspect of us. In creation, the brain and body move back into homeostasis. There's an expansion of energy, a release of energy from the tissues. The body goes into anabolism or tissue repair. There's health, there's order, there's regeneration taking place in the body. Elevated, heartfelt emotions like love, joy, trust, knowingness, gratitude begin to mobilize all these new chemicals that begin to repair and regenerate the body. When we're in this heartfelt state, we tend to be less selfish and more selfless. We have our attention now no longer on our body, on the things in our life, the people in our life, on our environment, or on time itself. Energy is always created in the creative process. There's growth and repair. We broaden or open our focus. And when we do that properly, we start feeling less separate and more connected to something greater. We start to imagine and dream of a reality beyond our senses. Now we're interested in causing an effect. We're looking at all possibilities instead of limited possibilities. The brain and heart go into coherence, and now the unknown becomes the adventure. And why is that important? Because if we're going to create something new in our life, we have to crave the unknown. So that
Right. Now let's so he mentioned like the survival state, which is that, you know, fear of life and feeling like the ego is constantly fighting with things that are happening. Whereas the divine state is where actually I'm releasing this beautiful energy into the world, and I become part of creating that new world
So
that we can't see, but we feel it first in our hearts. Now let's contrast that with what is feeling. And this again was from Mike. I think he said he got it from a dictionary somewhere. But it's very interesting because in every language that I've seen, the word feeling is both used for the senses and for inner feeling. And so it's perception by touch. So, you know, I'm holding this bottle with my hand, but it's not the hand that feels, nor the nerves, nor the brain that's taking in the information. Because if I was asleep, I wouldn't feel it. So feeling is always happening in the mind, whether it's from something from the senses or something from within. So when we're at the beach and we go, oh, I feel so peaceful, we can logically analyze that peace is not floating in the sky, in the molecules. Literally, they are just molecules and particles buzzing around and frequencies. And so when I feel peace, what am I touching? The senses are not touching anything. Certainly at the beach, when there's not a lot happening, the mind does often settle down and turn within so that I can feel my own energy. Yeah. So this energy is where the peace is coming from. And in a sense, I'm touching the soul. Or another way of saying it is that the energy of the soul, the essence, the frequency of the soul is able to fill the mind with those feelings without the ego interrupting. Because you could equally be at that beautiful beach and be stuck in a lot of negative thoughts. So it's not the beach, it's the self. And part of that kind of journey of back to the self is learning to choose, but actually, in a way, it's not a question of choice. When something's very clear, you naturally move in the right direction. So this is where we recognize what is the self and what is not the self. So when I'm coming from that emotional reactions, bad feelings, that's why it gets confusing, because we feel our emotions in a way. But when I'm in that reactive state, I can simply understand I'm stuck in the patterns of ego. We don't need to analyze it to death. We can observe that, okay, I'm getting trapped, what's going on, and pull myself back or refocus inwards. And sometimes that can happen instantly, and that's the aim, to in a second realize what's going on and jump back to the self. Sometimes it takes a few thoughts. You know, oh, that thought feels better. There's more truth in that thought. And then eventually we're like, oh, I'm back to me again. And it feels like that fresh air of the soul energy. Now, just to kind of clarify, to make it clear, the difference between emotion and feeling is pure love an emotion or a feeling? Now, sometimes it hopefully by the end of the explanation, and normally when I do this session with groups, I will take a lot longer. and give more examples. But hopefully, I think you would realize that what we call pure love is a feeling. And what is a feeling? It's the vibration and energy of the soul, uninterrupted, coming into the mind. And then I say, oh, I feel myself. I feel my own love. And that's why I put all these different expressions of that love, because we can be loving all the time. Whereas in the world, if I said to someone in the world, oh, I need more love in my life, they would say, oh, I can introduce you to someone. And that's what people have learned to associate with love, is like going fishing and or looking for an investment, like an investment bank. I'm going to invest my love and for a trade with someone, and then I have expectations, and then I get disappointed, and then that love can turn, what we thought was love turns into hate. But actually, this is why the world is so confused, because emotional love, it doesn't really even deserve the word love. It's just a big, long kind of ego trip. And maybe in another session, we can dive more deeply into that. But just coming back to that, the spiritual effort of checking in with, how am I feeling? Am I actually feeling? In other words, connected to my real self, or am I emoting? And a wonderful analogy for emotions, I think, is junk food. If you've been on a junk food binge for a while and then someone says, here, have a healthy salad, you'll feel like, oh, it's very bland, very tasteless, doesn't attract me at all. And that's why when people are very emotional, very addicted to that dopamine hits and adrenaline and cortisol, they so resist sitting quietly because it feels very empty at first. However, when you've been eating healthy food for a while and then someone says, here, have this soft drink or this chocolate, you go, whoa, that feels like quite fake. It's too strong and it leaves me feeling a bit sick. And so really the spiritual journey is developing a taste for peace instead of an addiction to drama. And so when we're in that emotional addictive state of the ego, I have a lot of feeling of life is happening to me. I need it to change. I've got the high and low of being a consumer of life instead of a creator. And so I'm going to get those dopamine hits and lows and up and downs. Whereas when I'm coming from the soul perspective, I have those beautiful feelings and thoughts coming from deeper within. I feel I'm co-creating something with life, which is my friend. And I feel my own power as a creator. So are we ready to break free from the game of life? Now, this is really the last analogy, but one that I find quite useful. So when I say breaking free, I mean exiting the level of needs. So before I mentioned that on the lower level, we feel that as a victim, we're always waiting for something to happen in life to make us relieved for a moment until the next thing happens. And then as a student, we're no longer fighting as much. We're curious and interacting and open to learning. And it's a much more intelligent state of being. But ultimately, we want to break free of the lessons and be our true self as a creator and a self-aware person. Now, some years ago on the plane, I happened to watch this movie, Player One Ready, in which a whole society was kind of living in this video game. And I just loved the analogy because in a way, that's what life is, moving up, levels. Now, in video games, which I don't actually play, but I understand from the film and from other references that in video games, there's something called an Easter egg, which is like a riddle that you have to work out, like a puzzle, like a challenge. And when you manage to get one of those Easter eggs, you level up. You get some powers, some superpowers, some energy, your battery goes up, whatever, you get a reward. Now, in this game of life that we're all in, how do we break those Easter eggs open so that we are freed from the ego and moving up to knowing who we really are? Those Easter eggs are your emotions. So anytime these little tests or big tests happen and you see yourself and feel yourself reacting in some way, there's a clue. You know, be grateful for it. Yay. You know, another lesson, another chance to up a level. And then, you know, look at that Easter egg and see, okay, where is my ego telling me lies here? Where am I not seeing the truth? And again, what is truth? Well, that's a big question, actually. I think first we're looking at how I see reality. And if our view of reality is closer to truth, we will feel it. So basically we'll feel those emotions going away and we'll feel ourselves reconnecting to the center of the record where all is calm. And so all day long, we're playing this game, and all day long, there's those chances to free ourselves and go to another level of joy, of bliss, of enjoying the game. And it gets more and more kind of interesting and we should be more and more curious. But back to the idea of our friend, and this is the last thing I'll finish with, is that yes, we can see life as a friend, as a game, as a drama, but also when we connect to the self and we feel that inner silence, that's where we can connect with a higher power. So whether you see that as God, where I don't know how many of you have meditated, how well you know BK philosophy, if you're completely new, but I've talked a lot about self and life, but I haven't talked about who is God. And I don't want to at this point launch into such a big topic, but I believe that God is as real as me and life, and that is our true friend who's constantly, if our mind is quiet, if we're tuned into the self, we can feel those higher feelings, and we can feel that God is so close, you know, that there's wisdom coming from a source within me, but also beyond me, you know, and ultimately that higher self is always connected with God. But I will stop at this point. You know, this is another huge topic, but I did want to mention, since we talked about friend, that you could be friends with yourself, friends with life, but also have a higher friend looking after you at every moment. So just taking this moment to be truly in this moment, to let all the buzz of thoughts to be like those clouds just drifting on by. They come and they go. I observe them from the space, the wide open space of the self. That vast, beautiful presence. And between the thoughts, I can feel that beautiful feeling of energy. And that energy feels like love, like expansion of joy, of freedom, like a bird flying in a wide open sky. Like I've left that castle of the ego that I've been holding on to so tightly. And I just see it as the sand castle that it always was. That I don't need it. I never needed it to feel good. I just simply need to be. To be that pure being. Not a good person, not a bad person, a divine being. Secure and needing nothing from life, but I give to life this gift of the self.